right, guys, happy Wednesday. And I couldn't stop thinking about this week, what it would look like if this was a different scenario. Imagine buying a car, right? Paying off the loan in full, passing your driver's test, and then the dealership refuses to hand over the keys because they are worried you might get into a fender bender and ruin their safety rating. This is exactly what for-profit nursing schools are doing to tuition-paying students in real time. They pocketed the financial aid, the federal financial aid, might I add. They watched us pass every single clinical class, and now they're holding degrees hostage over a single third-party exam? Why? Because under state regulations, if their NCLEX pass rate drops, from my observation and research, they lose their accreditation. They aren't protecting the nursing profession, if you ask me. They're protecting their profit margins, in my observation. So for years, I thought I was fighting my own battle. I was like, this feels like a one-off experience. Like, this isn't normal, but how many people can relate to this? And then I started reading lawsuits of students across the country, and I kept seeing the same reoccurring themes. I kept seeing similar complaints. One case involved an exit exam dispute. Another involved graduation requirements. Students said that weren't clearly communicated. Another involved accreditation concerns. And then ask, are these isolated incidents or systems of a larger issue in higher education? What happens when students invest years, money, free labor, and trust into institutions and something goes wrong? I became very curious about other students, what they had experienced in similar struggles. So I started reading those cases. Welcome back to the Nursing Investigation. You see, one thing people don't realize is when you're representing yourself, you spend a lot of time looking for similar cases, learning case law. Not because they're identical to yours, but because maybe you're trying to understand how court works, how regulators work, how schools and students have handled similar disputes. And then I found this very interesting. A study was published. For-profit nursing schools under fire. Students claim unfair exit exams block licensure not even a year ago. So it talks about how a growing number of students are speaking out about for-profit nursing programs that require students to pass internal exit exams before allowing them to sit for NCLEX. While schools defend that these exams are tools to maintain their NCLEX pass rate statistics, students and advocates argue that they create unnecessary barriers to licensure and leave graduates saddled with debt but no pathway to becoming a nurse, unless you want to retake the program, of course. Those classes and clinicals you've already passed and paid for. So, in the big picture, what is exactly happening and why does it matter to you? Many for-profit nursing programs are utilizing mandatory exit exams such as HESI, ATI, NLN, Kaplan. If a student doesn't meet their specific required score, and this is another thing, there is no consistency with these exams. Each school can set their own benchmark. So when one student can pass their exit exam at another school with 800, but my school requires me to get a 900 on the HESI, for example, where is the consistency and fairness in that? So she was ready to be a nurse because she went to another school that had a lower benchmark? How does that make sense? We're being blocked from graduation. We're being blocked from sitting for our actual NCLEX. Being forced to take unnecessary classes we already passed and paying for additional terms. You know, most that I've seen in my observations drop out entirely. So it says, why are schools using these exit exams? As we know from my research and from the Board of Nursing standpoint, I interpret it's to protect those NCLEX pass rates, which I don't blame a school for trying to do, but I think there's a better way to do it than just saying, hey, your career is over. Especially when they make out with full tuition and their reputation, and the student who did the free labor, the hard work, gets nothing. Financial incentives have come into question. What is that impact on the nursing students? Can you imagine the stress that we endure going through this process? Nobody talks about the difficulty of transferring credits to other programs, or the feeling of feeling trapped. Multiple states have increasingly sanctioned programs for this specific act. And the more we speak up about this, the more changes that will be made. But there's a stereotype that schools can do this. They're allowed. If it's in the handbook, it's the policy, it's allowed. Until somebody says otherwise. So what are advocates actually calling for, like myself? Nursing organizations, the Board of Nursing, policy leaders, and advocates who are already nurses to push for reform in the healthcare system. Transparent admission policies where nothing is hidden. Graduation-based coursework, nothing extra, not a barrier. Limit the high-stakes testing. Use it as a tool. Or allow one to keep taking it until they reach a certain score, or a certain score so many times they'll be good to go. Consistency across the board. Why should one nurse be able to graduate over another who have the same education? This issue really matters because behind every blocked exam, I think, is creating a bigger nursing shortage. Nurses are built. They're not filtered out. Barriers don't improve patient safety, but do the students harm? Do the healthcare system as a whole harm? And I think it deserves scrutiny. So one case I found very interesting is UMass. In Massachusetts, students protested a high-stakes exit exam policy. The backlash was so significant that administrators ultimately changed the course and began reviewing students individually, rather than relying solely on a test score. That immediately caught my attention because it showed that schools themselves sometimes reconsider these policies. Case 2, Houston Community College. In Texas, students completed their degree requirements and even received diplomas, but allege they were denied paperwork needed to sit for those licensure exams. What fascinated me wasn't about who's right and who's wrong. It was the fact that the dispute centered around a familiar question. What happens when students complete years of work who have equal education to a nurse but can't move forward professionally? And they get stuck in this redundant loop of infinite nothingness. Case 3, HCI College, the Healthcare Institute. In Florida, students alleged that this school created barriers that prevented graduation and NCLEX eligibility. The allegations were so serious, enough so, that it resulted in a class action litigation. Again, there may be some different facts. It may be a different state, a different school, different students, but there's a familiar theme. Students arguing they completed substantial work and were being prevented from reaching the finish line. We're finishing school but not allowed to enter the profession based off of a technicality? Case 4, Stone Academy. In Connecticut, the issues became so significant that state authorities became involved after the school's closure, leading to litigation and settlement efforts affecting students. Case 5, Morgan versus Sanford Brown. Now, what caught my attention about this one was it is in New Jersey, but it wasn't the nursing issue itself. It was the arbitration argument. Students challenged whether they had truly understood they were giving up their right to go to court. Something I'm currently dealing with. Case 6, the Health Career Institute. A federal judge ruled that a class action could proceed against this for-profit nursing school for unlawfully withholding transcripts and trapping students in expensive capstone courses. So when I sit back and think about other students now speaking up, all of us coming together, what does this look like? Does it look like students failing the NCLEX on the first time to protest to stop this? Does it look like holding schools to higher standards of authenticity and preventing these exit exams being used as barriers so it's fair across the board? So students are suing, and they're also contacting financial aid. Because I don't think you can simply ask your school's financial aid office to remove your loans, right? They're not going to do it. You know, they're paid by the school. Instead, what students are doing is bypassing the school completely and applying directly to the U.S. Department of Education using the following legal avenues. There's something called borrower's defense to repayment. If your school misled you about graduation requirements, job placements, accreditation, etc., you can apply for federal discharge through the Federal Student Aid website. Did they engage in substantial misrepresentation even? Presenting a curriculum you completed only to introduce an arbitrary barrier to withhold your credential? Was it a false certification discharge? If the school certified your eligibility for federal student aid, for example, you did your exit counseling, you were done with school, but they don't allow you to meet the state's requirement to actually work in that same profession due to withholding that necessary approval, you may qualify for a false certification discharge. And from my research and observations, it is my understanding if so many people file something like this about the same school, about the same situation, somebody's going to look into it. Because if it happens to one person, two people, it doesn't always matter. But the world cares when there's a systemic pattern. Key statistics that I also noticed. So in states like Florida, for example, there's a 10% probation rule. If a school's first-time NCLEX pass rate falls below 10% of the national average for 2 consecutive years, the program is put on probation or terminated. I believe in my research that this is the school's hidden motive. They block students who they think might fail the NCLEX to protect their own corporate profits and accreditation, putting the sole responsibility on the student who put in all of that hard work, time, and money. The exit exam fail rates also caught my attention. Student data shows that in some cohorts using internal tests, only 5 out of 30 students passed the exit exam on the first try. I think this proves that tests are often used as an artificial bottleneck rather than a fair educational tool. And I recognize this pattern. It feels familiar to me because I started with a lot of girls in my cohort, a lot of students in my cohort. Of course, you're going to lose somebody every term 9 out of 10 times. But let's say we all make it to the end and only a handful, maybe 2 at best, are actually taking their NCLEX out of everybody who completed nursing school. That raises questions for me. And there's the debt to degree trap. Students frequently report walking away with $29,000 to $44,000 in student debt and around 0 credentials. I think this visually contrasts the massive financial gain of these for-profit colleges against the $0 return for the student. Again, this feels familiar to me. I paid about $30,000, which I now know to be on the high end for a nursing program. So when you're charging top dollar and you give those students nothing, again, I think that deserves scrutiny. I wanted to see patients. I wanted to work under my own license. Now, I'm still working under somebody else's. I have to speak to attorneys, judges, board members, politicians, government officials, and other students affected. What has my life turned into? All in all, I didn't research these cases because they prove my case. But you can learn a little something from everyone. Every case is different. Every student situation is different. Every school is different. I researched these because I wanted to better understand whether the questions I was asking had ever been asked before. Am I the crazy one? Am I being a spoiled brat? And I think the answer is no. Because what I found was something I didn't expect. Across the country, other students like myself are wrestling with many of the same themes: graduation requirements, exit exams, accreditation, licensure eligibility, arbitration, and what happens when those years of education collide with institutional decisions that may conflict with consumer protection. The more I researched, the less I felt like I was studying my own story, and maybe this wasn't about just me after all. The more I felt like I was studying a much bigger one. And I speak with students, past students all the time. They're like, it's been so long, it doesn't matter. Honey, I've been fighting for years. Just because it doesn't matter to somebody else doesn't mean it doesn't matter to me. Even if I had went on and I had taken my NCLEX and I had my child and I was a stay-at-home mom, I would have went back to work. So it doesn't matter how many years have passed. Even if you had your license and wanted to go on vacation or travel the world for years, it is your right to have that ability to go back to work. So I don't believe time is real in a sense. That's a whole nother conversation. It's just something we have to follow because of this world we live in. I don't think the passage of time makes anything less valuable. So, all in all, I started this journey trying to understand my own case. I didn't expect it to lead me into the much bigger questions about higher education itself, the healthcare system, how nurses are actually treated, how the world really works. Some questions and comments from the week. I wanted to pull a lot of questions for this one because I feel like it's a lot of helpful information that I didn't know and I wish I had somebody to tell me. So someone had asked, can my nursing school legally withhold my degree or transcript just because of an exit exam, even if I passed every course? So this is what most people will tell you. Legalities depend heavily on the student handbook, right? that you signed when you enrolled. Generally, if the exit exam showed up more or less, the schools will argue that they have the right to withhold the degree. Doesn't mean they have that right, but be prepared for that argument. However, what I have found is courts and class action lawsuits are increasingly finding that when schools use these exit exams as an artificial bottleneck or change the passing scores mid-program or make you sign one contract and the other contract is different, it can constitute breach of contract under consumer fraud. Not to mention, did it align with the marketing materials? Did it align with your admissions representative and what they told you in that office? Furthermore, many state boards of nursing explicitly state that a high-stakes test should not be the sole factor in determining whether a student can graduate. Not to mention, a lot of these schools are contracted with these third parties. Contracted means they have a financial relationship. And that's all I'm going to say. Another student had asked, why do nursing schools do this? If I fail the NCLEX, it only hurts me, not them, right? Actually, it does hurt them more than you think. Nursing schools are heavily regulated based on their NCLEX pass rates. So when students pass the NCLEX the first time, it shows the school's value more or less. Like it shows they're doing what they need to do, like the school is good. If that pass rate drops below 10%, let's say, on the below the national average for 2 consecutive years, like we were talking about earlier, the State Board of Nursing can place them on probation or shut down the program entirely. The issue is not that the school is held under such demanding regulatories, but the for-profit schools are using the exit exams to filter out students they fear might fail the NCLEX. So when only certain students are taking the NCLEX, they're falsely and artificially, inauthentically showing an NCLEX pass rate stat that isn't real. We can't authentically judge the program either because they're not letting all the students who completed the program actually take the NCLEX. So I do believe schools have the right to protect their accreditation, but not at the cost of the student, not placing the responsibility on the student. I think they need to look at their own program. If they only want high achievers, only accept high achievers into your program. You don't accept C students and then say, hey, you need an A at the end to get out of the school. Like, there's got to be a give and a take. You can't take all the financial aid and accept everyone into the school to increase your profit margins while only letting the best of the best of the best out with the highest scoring students. That's absurd, if you ask me. So by withholding those transcripts, they're preventing those nurses or student nurses from taking the national exam. Again, this is going to keep federal financial aid and money flowing into their pockets while also protecting their accreditation. Another student had asked, I'm trapped by this exact same situation. Can I just call the financial aid office and ask them to cancel my student loans? This is what I researched too. No, I personally did not waste my time calling the school trying to get my loans canceled. They work for the school writes their checks. Anybody in that school who likes their job, who wants to keep their job, who is paid well, is going to have the school's back. That's just life. Instead, I noticed those same students going over the school, reaching out directly to the U.S. Department of Education, filing that borrower's defense and repayment claim online. You must prove, to my understanding, the school misled you. They engaged in unfair practices or somehow breached the contract by withholding that very credential you and the federal government grants, paid tens of thousands of dollars for in some situations to earn. Another student like myself had asked something along the lines of retaking the exit exam or pay for extra remediation just to get it over with. What should I do? While it is that of an option for many students out of desperation to just redo nursing school, I think you should look closely at the data. Many for-profit programs design these remediation courses to act as a financial trap, charging you thousands of extra dollars while offering very little actual help. And you don't actually need to redo nursing school if you completed nursing school. You're only redoing it to protect their accreditation, if you ask me. So who are you actually doing it for? You can retake it and document everything. If you decide to fight legally like I am, your first step should be filing formal complaints, especially with your state board of nursing, your state attorney general. Reach out to those politicians, those government officials, the school's accrediting bodies, whether it be the Board of Nursing and or ASIN, the Accreditation for Nursing. The National League of Nursing can't hurt. When regulatory boards see a pattern of the same complaint, to my knowledge, they launch investigations. Another student had asked, what kind of evidence do I need to gather if I want to join a lawsuit or file a loan discharge claim? Well, to me, you have to start building. You have to start somewhere. Get out a pen and paper, open up your notes app, and document everything that's happened. Connect with other people that it's happened to. I think most importantly, you have to start with the contract. Don't fear the contract. Don't fear what's in it. 9 out of 10 times, contracts are usually favored by the person giving it to you. But there's an unspoken rule that it should benefit both the parties. Even if it's 60-40, 51% and 49%, both people should benefit from that contract. The student handbook also, for example, you want to look at that and what actually happened in your situation. Look at those marketing materials. Look at what's written versus at what actually happened. Request a full academic audit, screenshots, downloads. What is your GPA? Proof you passed your classes. Do you have your official transcript? Do you have your diploma? What did your exit counseling look like? Did you pay all of your tuition? There was no misconduct. All written communications. Every email, every text, everything. Anything you spoke to a higher up in your school about, like the dean. I just think you need to document. That is what I would do. No matter what you do with that, it can't hurt to document. Because time goes by. You may forget things. Something may connect later down the line you didn't think of before. So you need to have a starting place and somewhere to go back to. I know it's a lot, but however you choose to go about this situation or preventing yourself from even getting in this situation, start with knowing where you're going to school, what their reputation is. Nowadays, reviews are so out there. Social media is a thing. Everybody talks, It's much easier to find out the truth about these schools than what they tell you. And if I could go back in time, I wish I knew everything that I know now. Always research. Going to school is a big deal. It can change your life. It's not an easy decision, and it shouldn't be. Be limited on where and who you choose to go to school for, what they stand for, and what they'll do to you if you end up in a technicality like me. All right, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.